Probably how she was able to hear the first shots. She's 49 years old. She will never celebrate her 50th birthday. That's short.
All right, so it looks like
Trelona Bokoviak.
they pick up in the middle of opening
Trelona is
statements.
49 years
Muting
old.
the
She's
mic
really
now.
well liked in the community. She owns a clothing store down on Pearl Street. And on this particular day in Boulder, there's snow on the ground. It's cloudy, but it's a mild day. And Trelona has her window down and she's driving through the parking lot. That's probably how she was able to hear the first shots. She's 49 years old. She will never celebrate her 50th birthday. Ricky Olds is the fourth victim. Ricky is 25 years old with a ton of potential and a great life ahead that she will never live. Ricky Olds worked at King Soopers. She's a head clerk. She's loved by her family and by her friends and colleagues at King Soopers as well. And at this moment at 227, she's over at the pharmacy area on the east side of the store. That side of the poster there on the left. Excuse me, over here on this side. She's over by the pharmacy and by customer service, helping people who work there. And they really like that about Ricky. It's one of the things that she does that they really appreciate about her. It's also why she's about to be gunned down, because the shooter's going to come in the east doors. And he's going to end Ricky's life at 25. She wasn't the youngest, though. The next victim, Denny Stong, is 20. He's loved by his parents. He's 20 years old. He also worked at King Soopers, but on this particular day, Denny was off from work. He stopped in King Soopers to get lunch. His mom, Lisa, also works at King Soopers, and she was on her lunch break, and she's outside in her car in the parking lot having lunch as her son gets gunned down in the front of the store at 20 years old. That's Lynn Murray. It's a great picture. Lynn is 62 years old. She's a loving mom. She has a great life. She works for Instacart, delivering groceries. And it's March 22nd, 2021, so we are still living through the pandemic. So Instacart's a really important job, actually. It means a lot to a lot of people. It's also why a lot of people in King Soopers that day were wearing masks. They're talking through glass partitions that soon will be exploded by bullets fired by the shooter. Some went to King Soopers to take care of themselves by getting COVID shots at 2:30 p.m. that day, and instead will face death. Lynn went there to shop for others who were unable to shop for themselves. Picture Lynn looking down at her phone. The final image she sees on her phone is this one. It's an order for Pamela A. How many bags does the customer need? She never gets to fill that out because she's at the checkout stand. And she's going to try hard to live. She's very determined to live. But the shooter is just as determined and just as intent on killing her on the spot. It's 2:28 p.m. and the shooter's about to get out of his car and begin killing as many people as he possibly can. But first, I want you to meet Terry Leiker. Terry is 51 years old. She's a really special person. She's overcome some significant challenges in her life, and she's worked at King Soopers for many, many years. And for people who live in the community, who shop at King Soopers at Table Mesa, Terry is a beloved fixture. She's a part of their lives. They go there, she's always there bagging groceries with a big smile on her face. And at 2:28 p.m., she's bagging groceries for an older gentleman named Patrick Cruz. And you're going to hear from Mr. Cruz during the course of this trial. But we'll never actually have the honor or privilege of meeting Terry Leiker. Her life is about to end. This is Jody Waters. Jody is 65 years old on this day. She has a loving family. She's had a great impact on a lot of people in the world. And that's a terrific Boulder type picture, isn't it? Unfortunately, the next picture you're going to see of Jody Waters is her hiding under a checkout stand, living her final seconds on this earth. And now it's 2:29 p.m. It was a regular day. For those 8 people, it's going to be their last day. And then the 9th, Suzanne Fountain. Suzanne is 59 years old. Her immediate family lives in New York. She and her partner live in Broomfield. And there's a hair salon in the Table Mesa shopping center that Suzanne goes to. And she went to that hair salon that day. So she went to the King Soopers at Table Mesa to do her grocery shopping instead of the one near her house where she lives in Broomfield with her partner. But for that hair appointment, Suzanne Fountain is alive today. But for that hair appointment, Suzanne Fountain gets to celebrate her 60th birthday. Actually, but for the shooter, she gets to celebrate her 60th birthday. Because he's about to take her life. The victims are random, but the murders are absolutely deliberate and intentional. If Jody Waters had left the store 3 minutes earlier, I wouldn't be saying her name, and we wouldn't be asking to hold the shooter responsible for killing her. If Suzanne Fountain didn't have a hair appointment in that shopping center, I'm not saying her name, and you're not finding the shooter guilty at the end of this trial, because she would still be alive. The victims were random, but the shootings were deliberate and intentional. This is Suzanne Fountain, and her life is about to end. There were 9 murder victims. There would have been far more than 9, but for the police response that day, including police officer Eric Talley. This is Eric Talley. He's 51 years old. He became a police officer as a second career, and he loves it. And by all accounts, he loves serving this community. So it's no surprise to his family and his colleagues that when he gets the call of active shooters at King Soopers, he races there as quickly as he can. And because of him and other police officers, many, many people are alive today. Many people are walking this earth. Unfortunately, there are 7 kids growing up without a father, because Eric Talley sacrificed his life to save others on this day. I wish that the victim families, the loved ones of these 10 who were seated here and seated in an overflow courtroom could come into this well, that we could lift up the victims here, that we could use this courtroom to honor them.
Object, personal opinion and meant to inflame the passions. Response?
Your Honor, I'm going to tell the jury what we're here for and what we're not here for.
Let's move on, please.
Sure. I am not going to show you videos, photos, and share with you powerful stories about their lives. That's not why we're here. Instead, we have the responsibility of going through videos and photos and powerful stories about how their lives were ended in cold blood. That's why you're here. The shooter prepared to kill them, planned to kill them, and went and executed 10 people at King Soopers. That's why you're here. You're here because the person who killed these 10 in cold blood is sitting right at that table, right there. The defendant has chosen to exercise his constitutional right to a fair trial. He's asserted that he's not guilty by reason of insanity. And I'm going to talk about mental health in a little while later this morning, but I want to hit on it right now before we get into some of the facts in the case. This is the overview of what you'll have to consider at the end of this trial. Was the defendant so diseased or defective in mind that he was incapable of distinguishing right from wrong with respect to the murder of 10 individuals and the attempted murder of 25 more? Or suffering from a condition of mind caused by mental disease or defect, as the statute reads, that prevented him from forming a culpable mental state? And in this case, it's going to be intent. That's what this case is going to come down to. I don't want to share this with you before I go on, because this is going to be the most important question for you at the end of this trial. And you know how the law works. You heard it yesterday from the judge. He committed a mass murder on March 22nd. You'll be able to consider all the planning and preparation, and I'll talk about that in a little while. And you'll be able to consider everything. We're going to lay it all out for you so that you have everything you need to reach the right decision in this case. It was clear to me yesterday and the day before that you are a thoughtful group who wants to reach the right outcome. If you follow the evidence and you apply the law, you will reach the right decision in this case. Because the central issue is going to be his claim of not guilty by reason of insanity. Mental illness does not mean someone's insane. Mental illness does not mean someone's insane. When someone kills someone, or 2 people, or 3 people, or 10 people, or 22 people, we don't say, that seems abnormal, let's just send them to a hospital. There's a very straightforward test that the law applies because our society and our law demands it. And it's a straightforward legal test. We covered a lot of ground in jury selection as we're supposed to, but the test is going to come down to this, and this is what Judge Bakke is going to read you at the end. Could he form intent? Could he distinguish between right and wrong? This is a serious case, a hard case, and an emotional case, but it's a straightforward legal test that you'll apply at the end of this trial. This is what Judge Bakke will read to you as the law around sanity. Could he form intent, and could he distinguish between right and wrong? So as we go through the evidence, I'm going to give you a preview of it in just a couple minutes. And I'm going to go over it with you and provide you with an overview and guide you through it. But throughout this entire trial, think about it in terms of, what am I hearing that shows he's capable of forming intent, or incapable, but capable of forming intent? It'll make your deliberations much easier if you track it this way. What is he doing that shows he's capable of forming intent? And what is he doing that shows me he's able to distinguish right from wrong? And you'll be able to start to fill up these 2 boxes as we go through the evidence. And I'm going to take you through it now. And I'm going to take you through it in very calm, clear fashion. But I also want to recognize that as I guide you through what you're going to hear at this trial, that it is brutal and horrific and emotional. But part of what I have to do here is present it to you in a clear fashion and guide you through what you're going to have to go through. Because insanity is a straightforward legal test, whether someone's sane or not. Could he form intent, and could he distinguish between right and wrong?
Judge,
One thing,
objects. It's a misstatement of the law. The law isn't and, it's or. It's a disjunctive.
this is what the law says. Incapable of distinguishing right from wrong with respect to the murder of 10 individuals and the attempted murder of 24 more, or suffering from a condition of mind caused by mental disease or defect that prevented him from forming the intent. We'll give you all the evidence to answer those questions with a resounding yes, he was able to form intent, and yes, he knew the difference between right and wrong. So I'm going to take you through a couple things, 3 things to start that are going to demonstrate that he clearly was able to form intent. First of all, this is a mass shooting, 10 people are killed, but no one's hurt by gunfire, not a single person. Think about that. What does that mean? What it means is, first of all, he was very proficient with the weapon. Second of all, he prepared for it. And third of all, if he hit someone, he executed them. No one hurt in a mass shooting by gunfire, not a single person. 10 people killed, no one hit and hurt and wounded. That's in part because 9 of the 10 victims were shot multiple times. What that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that if he hit the person, he then moved in and targeted them and executed them by shooting them again and again. And if he missed, that person had an opportunity to live. But anybody who got hit, he finished them off. That's why when you consider intent and his ability to form intent, the number, nature, and location of the gunshot wounds will matter. So how he carried out the shooting on March 22nd will tell you a lot about his ability to form intent. How he did what he did on that day, in that moment, will help answer the question for you of was he able to form intent? Because of things like this, the number, nature, and location of the gunshot wounds that the defendant inflicted upon others. It will also help you as we go through the evidence to see that he understood the wrongfulness of his actions. And he understood exactly what he was doing was completely wrong and horrific, and that he was going to be held responsible for it. And we'll go through all that evidence. This is Nevin's work truck. Nevin had just fixed the espresso machine in Starbucks. Now he's back in the work truck and he's on the phone with his friend Johnny. And what's about to happen next is going to happen fast because the defendant is brutal and he's acting intentionally. Nevin's on the phone. The black car next to Nevin's white van is the defendant's. The defendant has with him an assault rifle, large capacity magazines, ammunition, handgun ammunition, and a carrier vest. And he gets out of his car and without any moment of hesitation, confusion, hallucination, or delusion, he is up and he's moving and Nevin is his first target. He goes alongside the van so quickly that Nevin has just the opportunity to say, "What the F?" And Johnny hears booms close to the phone. And then hears a strange sound. And then hears booms a little more distant. And then the phone goes dead. And Johnny's left wondering what happened. And he yells for Nevin. He yells, "Are you okay?" He texts him. And there's never going to be a response to another text to Nevin because Nevin is dead. Because the defendant shot him 5 times, including one right through the left eye that went into Nevin's brain. There were 2 shots in Nevin's head. The defendant was able to form the intent to kill Nevin Stanisic. Johnny would later realize that Nevin hadn't shown up at the next work site, and he would look up on his phone. Was there a car crash in Boulder, Colorado? Because he's worried that the sound he heard may have been a car crash. And Johnny sees that there's a mass shooting at King Soopers and that the community has been devastated and that victims have lost their lives. And he starts to put the pieces together. And when he looks on the news, he finds out for sure that Nevin's dead because Nevin's still in his van being photographed by a crime scene and his legs dangling outside the driver's side door on the other side of that van. The defendant immediately starts moving east across the parking lot, turns and shoots back towards Nevin's van again. And then the defendant sees Kevin Mahoney, a 61-year-old man. Kevin has an opportunity to duck. He tries to hide. He actually puts his hands up for a moment, and then he tries to run. But the defendant chases him down and guns him down by shooting him 4 times, including an incredibly close kill shot to finish Kevin off. As that's happening, Trelona Barkowiak is in her car, her windows down, and she's driving. And she ends up making a strange turn, whether it be for fear or confusion or both, we'll never know because this guy killed her. And Trelona drives up on the pedestrian ramp of King Soopers, where people walk up to go into the store on the east side in those east stores. And Trelona wants to live. And she gets out of the car and she starts trying to run to the east stores for safety. And the defendant shoots her and Trelona goes down. Trelona starts to reach up and pull herself up on the railing for the pedestrian ramp. The defendant runs up, points his assault rifle down, and shoots Trelona point blank in the neck, so that gunpowder stippling is left on her face forever, and her life is over. And the doors that Trelona ran to for safety, this guy, he's about to run in to kill as many people as he possibly can. So I'm going to walk you through this animation. You're going to see a bunch of these during the course of the trial, but I'm going to take this first one slow so that you have an understanding of what you're looking at here. But with the help of the FBI, in conjunction with the district attorney's office, you're going to see a number of animations that have been put together because of weeks, months, actually years of work by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to provide you with an overview of where people were and how they were moving. This was done, and the other animations you'll see, by the FBI looking at different videos from security videos and body-worn camera videos, and then matching up all the timestamps and putting it all together. I'm telling you in a very simple way, but thanks to their work, we're able to see where people are and actually where people are moving. Because on some of these, I'm going to hit play and you're going to see people moving around as things are happening. Because this shows you a couple things. First, let me get you oriented to the colors you're looking at. The yellow bubbles on the screen are victims of attempted murder. People who are going to face possible death, but live another day. The individuals in orange, those orange circles, are people who are alive at this moment, but whose lives are about to end because of the defendant. And when their lives do end, on this animation, they become a large blue oval. So what you're looking at here is Trelona's car is on the pedestrian ramp there. Trelona is now represented by that blue oval, which means she's been killed. The purple dot is that guy. And he's heading towards those east doors. And you'll be able to see the writing better during the course of the trial, but each of those dots has a name next to it. So the two orange dots you see closest to the east doors there are Denny Stong and Ricky Olds. So at this moment in time, as the defendant's moving towards those east doors, there have been loud sounds outside, right? I mean, he's firing an assault rifle in the parking lot. So you're probably wondering, what are people hearing? What are they thinking? What's happening? So some people hear those sounds or they see things and they recognize it to be gunfire and they start to move. Other people like Ricky and Denny are wondering what those sounds are and are moving towards the east doors to look. Then you have others in the store who assume it's construction up on the roof. There's a little movement. There's some confusion at this moment in time. There's also over 100 people inside King Soopers right now. It's a regular, busy day. And then this guy comes in. That white circle shows the defendant with the assault rifle up. The first person closest to him is Ricky Olds. He's about to shoot Ricky once, right in the face. Ricky Olds is the only victim shot just once, because when the defendant shoots her point blank in the face, he's accomplished exactly what he intended to do. Angela Peacock is the woman in the yellow coat there on the right. She works at the fuel center across the street. And these are hardworking people. These are people who work hard for their lives to support themselves and their families. Angela's shift that day was 5:45 in the morning at the fuel center until 2:15. So she got off of work and then came over to King Soopers to do some shopping, and she's talking to her friends in the front of the store, people she works with. This is her workplace. These are her friends and colleagues. And she sees the shooter raise up the assault rifle and point it right at Ricky, and she starts to duck and she starts to run, and Angela goes down. She slips and falls right next to the checkout area there. And she's trying to get up. And as she's getting up, it suddenly hits her. This guy is not spraying the store with gunfire, she realizes. He's intentionally targeting people. She realizes in about 2 seconds, we're going to show you 2 weeks of evidence to support that he's intentional and he's deliberate. And she realizes she has a chance. So Angela runs as hard as she can all the way to the back store. And she's in the back of the store and then she's heading to the back door to get out. And she actually can't because there's a mass of humanity trying to get out the back door. And Angela is panicking because she hears the shots from the front and she knows the shooter's not done. And she runs and she hides under a plastic tarp in another part of the store. The other person in that photo there is Denny Stong, the 20-year-old victim. Denny sees Ricky get shot right in front of him. And he turns and he starts to run. And the defendant shoots Denny Stong in the back. And Denny starts to go down. But he wants to live. So he keeps going. And the defendant shoots him in the back again. And then Denny begins to crawl between the registers to try to get away. And this defendant pursues him into the register area and stands above Denny as Denny crawls on the ground, and then shoots Denny a third time to finish him. You're going to put that one in the intent box. This next one as well. Because as he does that, he realizes he's empty in his magazine, which holds the bullets that goes in a gun. Pops out the magazine, pops in another one. You'll see it, not a moment of delay. He was ready, he was prepared, he had practiced, he had planned for this. And that next magazine is in super quick because he is fast and he is ruthless. And now inside King Soopers, there's no confusion. There's just chaos. People are running, people are hiding, people are screaming. They're screaming active shooter, which 30 years ago, maybe people would have been confused by that. Now, customers and staff hear the bangs and they hear active shooter, and they know death has just come to King Soopers in Boulder, Colorado. And it's that guy. And people start to do everything they can to live. It's a question of what happens in a crowd of people who wants to live when a mass shooter shows up. What do? They're running, they're hiding, a bunch of people, everyone's moving fast now. But he is so deliberate, intentional, and brutal, and he's on the move, that he's going to catch a bunch of these people before they can get away. Let me talk for a minute about the victims of attempted murder. Because as the defendant then entered the front of the store, he began firing across the front of the store. There were bullets that ripped through victims that almost killed other people. And then there were shots that he missed. And we'll go through all of that. But there are 14 civilian victims of attempted murder. Angela Peacock, Casey Taylor, Hayden Steele. Casey and Hayden were roommates, and they were shopping there together that day. Kahendra Mala, Jacqueline Julie Keaton, Paul Johnson, Kimberly Breckus, Micah Huang, Taisha Beresford, Kelly Ray Dorr, Patrick Cruz, James Graham, Sarah Moonshadow, Nicholas Edwards, and Christopher Tatum. In the interest of time this morning, I'm only going to talk about a couple of these folks, but all of them nearly died that day. And all of them will talk about, when they testify here, the slaughter that they witnessed in the front of the store, and the people who died in the front of the store, or the people who died right in front of their eyes. They are lucky to be alive. They don't feel lucky. Some of them are damaged, and they'll testify about that. They don't look back on this day and feel fortunate necessarily. Some are in better places than others, but you're going to see a lot of trauma in this case. The path of wreckage that he left behind when he dropped the rain of terror down on Boulder, Colorado on March 22nd, 2021. This is Patrick Cruz, the older gentleman who Terry Leica was bagging groceries for. He's at checkout stand 9, as you can see. And just to get you oriented to this picture, King Soopers has these cameras above their cash registers. And you'll see these black squares on a lot of these photos. These black squares are so that people watching the cameras can't see what we punch in as our PIN codes, which if you never thought about before, you might be comforted to know there's something blocking you from putting your PIN code in when you do it at the supermarket. That's there in the camera system. More important in this picture is Patrick Cruz. He's older. He quickly realized that something was happening. Then he saw the defendant moving fast and deliberate. And Patrick Cruz realized, because he's an older gentleman and he wasn't going to move particularly fast, that his only chance at living was to go down and fake that he was dead. So he goes down to the ground and fakes as though he's dead for an hour until law enforcement rescues him. And he hid for that entire time because death came very close to Mr. Cruz that day. He'll testify about a bullet that whizzed between his head and Terry Leiker's head when the shooting started, before he had a chance to go down. And then he goes down, and the other person in that photograph there on the left-hand side is the defendant, wearing his carrier vest. And you see the right arm up. That's because he's holding his assault rifle, taking aim at his next victim. Another victim of attempted murder is James Graham, who was at the checkout stand buying ramen for himself for lunch. He works nearby King Soopers. And he would go to King Soopers and pick up his lunch very often. So he's buying his ramen, and then the shots start. And Mr. Graham hears bullets hitting the glass partitions right above his head. And he starts to run, and the bullets are hitting the glass behind his head as he's moving. And Mr. Graham runs for his life, literally. And he runs as hard as he can. And then a pain rips through the back of his leg. And he thought he had been shot. But in fact, he pulled a muscle trying to run for his life. And he ends up outside in the back of the store, hiding in the snow, laying on the ground until law enforcement gets him up and gets him out of there. These are the things that people did to survive from the defendant's attack on that day. But not everybody survived. The sixth victim was Lynn Murray. When the defendant started moving across the front checkout area, Lynn started trying to run the other way. The defendant saw her, closed on her, focused on her, and then killed her by shooting her 4 times. Terry Leiker had gone to the ground and ducked at first. But as the defendant closed in on Terry, she stood up and tried to go. It was the only choice left, because the defendant chose to kill as many people as he possibly could. And he shot Terry Leiker twice. As Terry Leiker was being shot and killed, there was a mother and her adult son, Sarah Moonshadow and Nicholas Edwards, and they're right in the next checkout lane right there. And when the shooting began and bullets were whizzing by their heads, they ducked down and they went to the ground. And Nicholas was panicking. And Sarah, his mom, was telling him, "Don't go, not yet, don't go, don't go." And she's trying to figure out when they can escape. And she's trying to count the bullets, because Sarah knows guns. And she's trying to time their run for a reload. But the defendant's coming close, and he's coming around that checkout stand, and Sarah realizes they have no choice but to go. And she tells Nicholas, "Go, go, 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 go." And they start to run, and the defendant sees them. So the defendant pursues them, and he lifts up his assault rifle, and he points his rifle at them, and he opens fire. And he misses. And they run out the doors. And they'll come here to testify. But when the defendant missed and he started to go after them, he realized that Jody Waters is right here, hiding under the checkout stand. And he looks at Jody. And he lifts up his assault rifle. And he points it at her. We talked a lot in jury selection about hypotheticals and what ifs and different scenarios. You'll have to answer the question at the end, could the defendant form the intent to kill Jody Waters? When he lifted up his rifle and pointed at it right here, could he form the intent to kill Jody Waters? This is the answer the defendant provides for you. That's him in the white circle. Jody Waters is on the bottom left there of the white circle, hiding under the register, the checkout stand. The defendant is going to shoot her 4 times, including once in the head. Could he form the intent to kill Jody Waters? That's the picture you're going to remember when you say yes at the end of this trial, ladies and gentlemen. The video system doesn't have audio in King Soopers, so we can't play for you. We'll never hear what Jody Waters was saying at this moment, but one can imagine what her final words were. One can imagine what her final thoughts were. And we don't have to imagine how the defendant responded. He shot her 4 times, including once in the head at point blank range. Could he form the intent? All of this happened, these 8 lives that were taken, in 68 seconds. 68 seconds. So from the time that he kills Nevin all the way to him killing Jody Waters, 68 seconds. He is moving fast and he is brutal. It was 33 seconds in the parking lot, but a total of 68 seconds from Nevin to Jody Waters. As much as the shots that he took and the people that he killed demonstrate his intent, there's also people that he chose not to shoot at and not to kill that make it crystal clear that he knew exactly what he was doing. So let me tell you about a man named Paul Roeder. Mr. Roeder is 90 years old and he's shopping. And he's shopping in King Soopers and he's moving slow. He's shuffling his feet and he's holding onto his cart for balance. And throughout everything I just described, the defendant shooting people outside, the defendant shooting people inside, bodies drop into the ground, people bleeding everywhere, chaos, running, people hiding. Mr. Roeder keeps shopping. And he assumes that the bangs are coming from the roof. So he continues. And now the defendant has just killed Jody Waters, his 8th victim. Bless you. And he's hunting for other victims. The defendant starts going through the store, hunting for other victims, and he's looking for people to kill. And Mr. Roeder and he come across one another. And the defendant does what he does. Pulls up with the assault rifle, aims it at Mr. Roeder, sees Mr. Roeder, but also sees there's no fear, there's no panic, there's no running. Mr. Roeder's just shopping. And the defendant drops the gun to his side and walks off and hunts for more victims and lets Mr. Roeder live. And the defendant's continuing to hunt and Mr. Roeder's continuing to shop, and they come across each other again. And again, the defendant passes up the shot at Mr. Roeder and leaves him. What does this tell you? This will tell you that the defendant was intentionally targeting people who were in fear and who were running, who he had power over, who he was scaring, and who he could chase and kill. And Mr. Roeder's just walking right through. And people who were in front of the defendant but not running and hiding were able to live, including Clint Ponsford. And I'll tell you about Clint in a minute, but let me show you this picture of Mr. Roeder first. This is Mr. Roeder after. So Mr. Roeder goes to the checkout stand and there were bodies there. And Mr. Roeder waited for someone to come check him out and eventually became frustrated that no staff from King Soopers was coming. And he just heads out of the other doors and he lives. This is Clint Ponsford. Clint is 62 years old. He is an intellectually and developmentally disabled person who works for King Soopers. And he's dating Terry Leiker, and they have a great relationship. He doesn't know at this moment in time that Terry's dead. He was outside collecting carts as part of his work for King Soopers when the shooting began. And at this moment in time, he's come in the East Stores here, and he sees Ricky Olds. And you can only see her legs in this photo. But there's a large pool of blood forming beneath Ricky's head because the defendant shot her right in the face. And understandably, as any of us would be, Mr. Ponsford is confused. And he looks down at Ricky, and you'll see he's actually puts his arms out like, what's happening here? What's happening here is actually a natural, normal reaction to a mass shooting in King Soopers in Boulder, Colorado. At this exact moment, the defendant is passing right in front of Clint Ponsford. The defendant looks over at Clint, sees him, and then just keeps walking. Clint doesn't run, doesn't hide. There's no fear. There's no challenge. There's no adrenaline rush, which is a phrase you'll hear later, by the way. There's no adrenaline rush for this guy in killing Clint Ponsford. Clint actually leaves the store for a few moments and then comes back in and looks at Ricky's body again because he's genuinely, understandably confused. And the defendant is now coming back across King Soopers, hunting for people, and sees Clint again, and again doesn't shoot at Clint. As much as the people he killed and how he killed them tell you so much about his intent, his decision to pass up these two older gentlemen, Mr. Roeder and Mr. Ponsford, will tell you so much about his deliberate decision-making in these moments. That for whatever reason, he chooses not to shoot at them and not to kill them. But it's not because he's done, because he's nowhere near done. He's hunting for victims. After passing up the shot at Clint Ponsford, the store, King Soopers, is completely quiet. Except for this haunting background music that you never really notice when you're in a supermarket. But the people there that day will never forget. It just continues to play. And it's quiet. Because everybody's hiding. And the defendant is hunting. He had already gone past all the aisles once, looking up and down every aisle, looking for people. He's just scanning every aisle. Like you go, like someone may go looking for what aisle do they have that in? He's wondering, what aisle can I shoot another person in? And he's gone by aisle 10 already. And he didn't see anybody. And that's probably because they have display stands in aisle 10, where they have the sales or the snacks set up, and there's display stands in aisle 10. That must have been where Suzanne Fountain was hiding when he didn't see her the first time. But he returns to aisle 10, and now it's 4 minutes after the shots were first fired. 4 minutes. We'll never know for sure because there's no camera view of aisle 10, but Suzanne Fountain must have been hiding for 4 minutes or so. And at some point, she comes out of hiding because she wants to live. And she has a lot to live for. And she's going to try to make a break for it. But the defendant hits aisle 10 as Suzanne's moving. And the defendant's at the end of the aisle, and he immediately raises up the assault rifle. And he's about to pull the trigger. The number, nature, and location of the gunshot wounds will tell you everything you need to know about the defendant's intent. Because he shoots Suzanne Fountain and hits her 3 times. Once in the head. The shot in the back explodes through her front. And from the middle of the aisle, that bullet carries her human tissue all the way down through the end of the aisle and through the checkout area. And now the 9th victim is dead. And the defendant continues hunting. And Suzanne Fountain, she wasn't the only person hiding. There are a lot of people hiding all throughout the store. There are people in the pharmacy. There are people upstairs in the office where if he goes up there, they are trapped. There is no way out. They're hiding and they're praying. There are people hiding in the dairy section in the back. There are people hiding outside behind King Soopers. And there's people hiding on the shelves, like this emergency room doctor in the next aisle over from Suzanne. She put herself onto a shelf with the potato chips bags. She and her husband had been skiing that day, and they had stopped at the King Soopers for lunch on the way back from skiing. And they were in different parts of the store when the shooting began. And now they're both hiding in different places and they're texting one another. One can imagine what they're texting and saying to one another at this moment. And the emergency room doctor's laying there on the shelf, and she hears people dying in the initial barrage, and then the quiet for 3-4 minutes. And then the doctor hears the burst of gunfire at Suzanne. And the doctor can smell Suzanne's blood from where she's laying. And she can hear Suzanne's last breaths from the next aisle over as Suzanne dies in aisle 10. And there's people hiding all throughout the store. The defendant is looking for them, and he is moving fast. He's marching through that store with an assault rifle, looking for additional victims, and he is moving fast. But now, there are other people moving even faster, because people have called 911. And the 911 calls are starting to come in from King Soopers. This first call is from Logan Smith. Logan worked for Starbucks in King Soopers. And on this particular day, it was a normal, regular day for Logan. He sees the defendant entering the east side doors of King Soopers. And Logan's over on the west side of the store. And he calls 911.
911, let's get a emergency. Hi, I'm at the Table Mesa King Soopers at Broadway in Table Mesa. Was that the fire? Are you there? Are you there?
Are you there? No. Logan's no longer there. Because when Logan saw his friends and his colleagues, Ricky and Denny, get gunned down right in front of his eyes, he dropped his phone. And Logan then grabbed an older person and pulled that person back into Starbucks, and they hid behind the counter of Starbucks until the police rescued them. And now 911 calls are pouring in, and the dispatchers are sending out the information. And they're sending it out, of course, to the Boulder Police Department, which patrols this area, but to all of Boulder County, and then to all of Metro area. And the call is going out. Boulder needs your help. There's an active shooter at King Soopers. In fact, the defendant had moved so quickly and so deliberately that when the calls are coming in to 911, people are describing it as 3 active shooters with assault rifles wearing armored vests. So the information being communicated to law enforcement is anywhere from 1 to 3 active shooters. And the call goes out. Boulder needs your help. There's between 1 to 3 active shooters at King Soopers. And they are gunning down innocent people. Denver Police Department, on the way. Lakewood Police Department, we're coming. Jefferson County SWAT, Golden Police Department, Arvada Police Department, Westminster Police Department. The Broomfield Police Department, the officers, some of them are in the police station when they hear the call. They go running out to their cars. There's a Broomfield officer on a routine traffic stop who turns his car around, and together they hit Highway 36 at the same time. And they're going to come flying up 36 to try to save lives. But they're not going to make it in time, despite their best efforts. They hit 36 and they're going 90 miles per hour with lights and sirens up 36. Then they're going 100, 110, 115, 120 miles per hour, 125 miles per hour. They're going to try to get there to save people. And there are people hiding all throughout the store. And the defendant is hunting. You're going to meet a young man named Christopher Tatum. You're going to meet him even though the defendant tried to take that opportunity away from you. Because Christopher Tatum was in the store that day. There's a woman named Ilan Shakti, who you'll hear from. And when the gunfire broke out, Ms. Shakti started running. She was trying to get away, and she fell and broke her T6. She broke her back. And Christopher Tatum saved her and helped her get out of the store. And then Christopher Tatum ran back into the store to try to save and help more people, which he did. But when the defendant saw Mr. Tatum, he raised up that assault rifle, pointed at him, and opened fire on Mr. Tatum. Mr. Tatum ran out the back of the store with bullets following behind him. The defendant is hunting for people. But now the police are on the way. And of course, the Boulder County law enforcement agencies who are located closer, they're coming fast. And it's Erie Police Department, Longmont Police Department, Lafayette Police Department, the Sheriff's Office, and of course, the Boulder Police Department. And the officers are hearing the calls of active shooter or shooters at King Soopers, and innocent people are down. I'm going to play you this short clip from Officer Eric Talley's dash cam. His dash cam recorded him heading to King Soopers after he got the call that there were active shooters there.
We have another report that the party is where I read that 587 going Are you still complying with this?
You'll be able to watch the rest of the video during the course of the trial. Because Officer Talley and other Boulder police officers got there as fast as they did, no other civilians were injured or killed that day. But Officer Talley sacrificed his life in that response. When he pulls into King Soopers, there's two police officers who arrived just before him, Officer Pam Gignac and Officer Brian Capobianco. And they've arrived and they get out and they know there's anywhere from 1 to 3 active shooters with assault rifles and armored vests inside King Soopers. And Officer Capobianco, you'll learn, pulls his rifle out of his car. And he goes up to Officer Gignac and he pauses for a second. And then he says, we go, let's go in right now. And he starts running full speed. And Officer Talley comes into the parking lot right behind them and he gets out with his handgun and he runs as fast as he can and catches up to Officer Capobianco and Officer Gignac. And the three of them are going into the store. And they're going in and the doors open and the 3 officers step in and it is completely quiet. Just the music. Everyone's hiding. And the officers are trained for stimulus. That's what officers train for, you'll hear about during the trial in an active shooter training. When they train for these things, listen for the gunshots, listen for the screams, watch for someone running. And there's nothing, just the music. And as they're coming in and the doors have opened and their radios are communicating that there's active shooters at King Soopers, this guy hears them. Now you're going to start to fill out that wrongfulness box, being able to distinguish between right and wrong, because the police are there. And he sets up to ambush them. And as they creep in quietly, looking around, trying to figure out where are the shooters. And police officers look at a supermarket differently than most people when they come in this situation. They look at a supermarket and they see no cover and a ton of open space. And they're moving in. And Officer Talley is just ahead of Officer Capobianco. And they have no idea that as they're coming this way, the defendant's right off to this side, waiting to ambush them. And as Officer Talley steps forward into sight, the defendant fires. The bullet that he fired hits Officer Talley in the left side of the head and goes out the right side of the head. And Officer Talley starts to fall to the ground. And then the defendant shoots him again. And Officer Capobianco and Gignac have no idea where the shots are coming from. And they think Officer Talley is ducked down on the ground. So they back up. They're trying to figure out what is happening here. Where are the shots coming from? And they retreat outside for a moment. And they're trying to figure out where did Officer Talley go. And just then, a second team of officers is starting to form up at those east doors to go inside. And the officers from a bunch of different agencies now responding because Boulder needs your help. So there are officers from the University of Colorado Police Department, the Sheriff's Office, Open Space Park Ranger, more Boulder Police Department officers. And they're all arriving there around the same time and coming to King Soopers. And many of them had never met before. But they're immediately coming together and going inside to face the threat and try to stop this guy from killing more people. And there's a ton of people hiding in the store still who are hearing all this. This next animation, in a moment, I'm going to hit play and you're going to see things start to move. So let me get you oriented to this. The first thing you'll notice when you look at this one is we have a lot more blue ovals now than we did before. Those blue ovals tragically represent human lives that have been ended. So you could see, for example, Kevin Mahoney on the bottom right of your screen, where he ran in an attempt to get away from the defendant. Then you see Trelawna's body on the pedestrian ramp there by the RAV4 that she had gotten out of, where the defendant shot her point blank in the neck. And we go inside those east doors. You see Ricky Old's body. The next one over to the right, as you go right, is Denny Stong's body, where he tried to crawl through the checkout area to get away from the defendant after being shot twice and before being shot the third and final time. Lynn, Terry, and Jody all died really closely together. Those are those three ovals on the right-hand side of the screen. And then you see the orange dots. One is Mr. Cruz. He's hiding by faking as though he's dead. Kahendra Mala is one of those yellow dots, hiding in the checkout area right there. And the third yellow dot is actually Mr. Roeder, who's continuing to head out of the store. What's important here, as you start to realize the defendant completely understood the difference between wrong and right, is that purple dot is the defendant. He sees the law enforcement response. What he has done is beyond wrong. And he knows it. And he knows the police are there in response to what he has done. He's distinguishing between wrong and right. He's not looking out that window saying, I wonder who those people in uniforms are. I wonder what brings them to King Soopers today. I hope it's nothing to do with me. He knows that what he's done is wrong. I mean, the embodiment of everything wrong in the world is what he's done at this moment.
Objection. Inflaming the passions.
He's killed.
Sustained.
Rather than inflame your passions, I'll put it this way. He's killed 10 people. That's wrong. And now the police are there. And for the first time, the defendant's going to retreat. He's actually going to go the other way. He's going to stop charging ahead and he's going to retreat because the police are there and represent in this moment in time, on March 22nd, what's right. And he knows it's in response to what he's done. So you're going to see him start to back up here. And I've hit play. The small blue dots are the police officers. And you're going to see them start to come together. And I'm going to walk you through this as you're watching it. And you'll see it again during the trial. But the police officers start to gather behind Trelawna's car. And one can imagine that they're confused and they're nervous. And they gather there for a moment and they pause. But you'll see and you'll hear and you'll learn that one of them says, active shooters, we go. Active shooters, we have to go. Go. And everyone starts to run. You see them there. and they start to move to the east doors. And the defendant's in that back left corner of the supermarket. And then you see more blue dots coming from the left-hand side of the screen, the east side of the store, outside. And they're moving up together. And then another officer coming, and that's Officer Capobianco from the bottom of the screen, coming back up. There's 11 of them at this point. And the defendant is about to ambush them because he knows what he has done is wrong and horrific. So he heads down to the aisle that lines up with the front door. And he looks down that aisle. And then he jumps out in the aisle with the assault rifle and opens fire at the police officers. And he fires repeatedly at the police officers. Most of the police officers don't see where the gunfire is coming from at this point because he just jumped out at the end of the aisle. This is a picture from outside those front doors, but inside the vestibule on the east side. And what you see there are two police officers. I'm sorry that the picture's blurry, but I'm sorry because that's the glass that's being smashed by the defendant's gunfire. And it is terrible that we almost have 3, 4, or 5 more dead people. Because those bullets are right about at head height, ripping through the windows in the front area and then going through those back windows. That officer you see on the right-hand side of the screen, that's Officer Brandon Braun. Officer Braun works for the University of Colorado Police Department. They may, as you may know, they have their own police department. Officer Braun responded when he heard the calls from help from King Soopers. He jumped in someone else's car and drove another person's police car to King Soopers. When he got to King Soopers, he jumped out and he went to the trunk because that's where they keep the armored vest. And he went to open the trunk, but he couldn't figure out how this particular car's trunk opened. So he just left the armored vest behind and he ran to King Soopers. And he joins up with this group. He's right there on the right-hand side of your screen. When the glass starts breaking all around their heads from the defendant's gunfire, Officer Braun gets hit in the face with glass in his eyes and across his face. And he believed, and the other officers believed, he'd been shot. He is lucky to be alive. And he staggers back and they take him back and they're clearing the glass from his eyes to see if he's actually been shot in the face. And then they're patting down his body to see if he's bleeding at all from any wound. This is the inside of the store at that moment. You see the officers ducking there at the bottom of the screen. The door where it looks like it's misshapen, that's the glass shattering at head height where the defendant opened fire on them. That police officer who's ducking where you could see the front of her hat, that's Officer Jenny Schmeitz. She joined the Boulder Police Department 1 week earlier. She'd worked for law enforcement in other places, but this is 1 week in with the Boulder Police Department. The defendant tried to kill all these police officers. These are the same doors that Mr. Ponsford was standing next to where the defendant passes up the shot. But here he ambushes them and he tries to kill them because he knows they're in response to what he did. There's a police officer who does see the defendant at the end of the aisle, and that's Officer Richard Steidel. So this is a list of all the police officers who the defendant tried to kill. I'm only going to talk for now about Officer Richard Steidel. Officer Steidel dove to the ground when the defendant opened fire with his assault rifle and then waited because he correctly guessed that when the defendant jumped at a site, that the defendant would come back and try to kill them again. And he was right about that. And when the defendant stepped back in the aisle to open fire on the police officers again, Officer Steidel opened fire, bless you, with his handgun. And even though it's a far distance for a handgun, he was able to hit the defendant in the leg. And the defendant stumbles and staggers out of sight. And the defendant then walks around the corner. He sits down on the floor. He gets up. He walks around. He stumbles. But you'll see the wind is completely out of his sails at this moment. He's done. His ability to instill fear in others, that's over. And the killing is over. But this incident still has not ended. But what you learn next, what happens next, will help you answer those questions about sanity at the end of the trial. because there's now a tremendous police response to King Soopers. And a vehicle pulls up from the Boulder Police Department. And that vehicle has a big loudspeaker on the roof. And from the loudspeaker, you can hear, "This is the Boulder Police Department. Come out and surrender. The store is surrounded. Surrender now." And when you ask yourself in deliberations, does the defendant know the difference between wrong and right? You'll ask yourself this question: what did he do when they demanded that he surrender? He put down the gun, he put down the ammo, he put down the handgun and the handgun ammo. He takes off the carrier vest, he takes off his shirt, and he takes off his pants. And he's just in his underwear. And he puts his hands up. And in response to law enforcement demanding that he surrender, he says, "I surrender, I give up." The police can't hear it because he's still off to the side. But the people hiding in the pharmacy, praying that they're not going to get killed, they hear him say, "I surrender, I give up." That's how you're going to answer the question of, did he know the difference between wrong and right? He stripped down to his underwear because he knew that if he presented any armed threat to law enforcement, they would likely shoot him again and kill him. And he wanted to live. The police can't see him because he's out of sight. He's over by the pharmacy area. So they continue to make the announcement. And the women in the pharmacy, the witnesses will testify, they hear him then say, "I've stripped down to my underwear. What else do you want me to do?" There's no hallucinating. There's no delusion. There's no confusion. There's no question. The police are there, and he's trying to surrender to the authorities for mass murder that he committed. Ultimately, the police get inside the store, and it's Broomfield Police Department, Denver Police Department, members of the Sheriff's Office, members of Boulder Police Department, and they come in, and you'll learn that they order the defendant to do several things. Turn away from us, back up, move to the right, back up again, keep your hands up. Now go on your knees, put your hands behind your back. And he understands and complies with every single command. There's no question, there's no confusion. He's not saying, "Who are you here for? What have I done? What's happened?" He knows fully well that he's committed the mass murder and that he's about to be arrested. And he complies with every command that the police give him. And he's handcuffed. And now SWAT and the police officers start to go through the store, and they're rescuing other survivors. And they're pulling people from the pharmacy, from the dairy section, off the shelves. All these people were hiding this entire time. They're saving these people and bringing them outside from the store. And you're going to learn that there was a Broomfield police officer who was working his way through the front of the store. And he finds this on the ground. This is a 30-round magazine. It's a large capacity magazine. And the police officer picks it up as he assumes SWAT dropped it. And they went in. The Broomfield officer looks at it, and he assumes that SWAT dropped it because civilians, non-law enforcement, are not permitted to possess or purchase 30-round magazines. The carnage that they can cause without someone having to reload. So he realizes it must belong to SWAT. The officer looks at it and then looks inside and sees that it's empty. Then he looks down and he sees Denny Stom's body, or Denny crawl before being killed by the defendant. And he realizes that this 30-round magazine belonged to the mass shooter. And he realizes with horror that he's holding the very magazine that was used to kill Denny Stom. And after that, he's going to realize that he can no longer work. There's a lot of trauma. I'm going to put this back on because the victim family members who are in the overflow room likely want to hear what we're saying. So nearly everything that I've described, nearly everything the defendant chose to do that day is captured on video. King Soopers had surveillance video inside and outside the store. There's also body-worn camera recordings from many of the police officers who responded. And on this, there are those videos. There's also the 911 calls, and there's the animations that the FBI put together to show you where people were and how they were moving. This video exhibit alone would prove the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Because it shows you that he acted with intent and that he knew the difference between wrong and right on March 22nd. And if this was all we had, I would argue the defendant's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But I'd be doing a disservice to the victims. And you have an important job to do as jurors. And I'd also be disregarding the investigation that was conducted after the shooting that will show you so much about the defendant's planning and preparation. But that video exhibit alone would prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It will answer the questions, that alone. Could he form intent? Yes. Did he know the difference between right and wrong? Yes. But there's so much more. There is so much more. This video exhibit, though, will allow us to do a couple things that are really important that I want to share with you this morning. First, instead of this trial going 2.5 months, we're going to be done in 2.5 weeks. Because so much of what the defendant did was captured on video. Instead of calling 360 named witnesses for this case, which there were, we'll call at most 60. Instead of showing you the photos, of which there are hundreds and hundreds of the victims laying on the ground in King Soopers, you won't have to see a single one of those because you're going to see them fall to the ground on video. Instead of showing you the autopsy for each of the 10 victims with the trajectory rods that show what direction bullets were traveling through their body, there's no need for you to see those. You won't have to see the hundreds of autopsy photos because we have this. So it's going to allow us, as the prosecution, as the people, to show you what you need, but not every ounce of horror that the defendant inflicted upon the world that day. And you'll learn through the testimony the defense has all of this. But to prove the case, the prosecution need only show you this. But there's so much more. You'll learn that when police officers went to the hospital with the defendant, and the next day he was still at the hospital and they had to execute a search warrant, which is a order signed by a court, allowing them to take certain items from the defendant's person, like swabbing his hands, taking photographs of him and so on. And then they were going to transport him to the jail because he was released from the hospital the next day after being treated. You'll see a video that shows the defendant, law enforcement walking into his hospital room, him not saying anything like, "Who are you? Why are you here? What have I done?" Instead, they read to him the warrant they have, and they say, "Now we have to check some things. Can you give us your right hand? Can you give us your left hand? Can you move forward? Can you move back? Can you stand up? Can you put your hands behind your back so we can handcuff you? We're going to take you to the jail now." He does all of those things without any question, without any confusion, and certainly without any hallucination or delusion. He completely understands what's happening. It's law enforcement. He's under arrest. They're there to take him to the jail. They have a warrant approved by a judge saying they get to do certain things. to document the evidence in the case, and there's no confusion at all. Let's talk about the mental illness and the not guilty by reason of insanity plea that the defendant has asserted. This is the definition, again, of not guilty by reason of insanity. Incapable of distinguishing right from wrong and unable to form the mental state of intent. And this is at the time of the shooting on March 22nd. You're going to hear about everything from prior to the shooting and everything after the shooting, but the question will be, was he sane on March 22nd? And you'll be able to consider all the planning and all the preparation leading up to the shooting. I'm going to take you through some of this now to give you a preview of what you'll see during the course of the trial. So as you talked about in jury selection, you're going to want to know about his mental health treatment prior to the shooting. Understandably, you're going to want to hear about his inability to function, the tests, the brain scans, the treatment that he had, the doctors that he went to, the medication that he was prescribed, and the inpatient hospitalization that he went through. We're going to talk a lot about that, but that testimony is going to be pretty short because he never went to the hospital. He never received any medication. He actually never went to a single doctor for anything related to mental health before killing 10 people on March 22nd. Certainly had no treatment. There were no brain scans. There were no tests, and he was functioning. In fact, prior to the shooting, he's driving his car every day. He's working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week at a family restaurant. 10 hours a day, 6 days a week at family restaurants. The family lives in Arvada, and around this time, they're owning 4 or 5 restaurants. And the defendant works there on a regular basis, as do many members of the family. This is prior to the mass shooting. But I want to be really clear. From the investigation, it was learned the defendant was struggling with mental illness prior to the mass shooting. Because after the mass shooting, the family was interviewed by law enforcement and by the FBI, and they described seeing the defendant being withdrawn, mumbling, acting odd, laughing to himself, and presenting concerning behaviors. And that during the pandemic, those things became worse when he stopped going to the gym as much and his life changed, and he was basically just going from home to work and work to home. Home to work and work to home. And during the pandemic, these things were exacerbated. And he started to show signs of paranoia, and he wondered if the FBI was following him. And he talked to his family about the fact that he thought he was being followed. We're going to share all of that with you. And you're going to learn about the fact that after he was arrested, he was taken to the Boulder County Jail. And when he was taken to the Boulder County Jail, at his demand, he was left isolated and untreated from March through December. And I say that because yesterday, some of you pointed out, did the mental illness get worse after the shooting? He did just kill 10 people. Isolated, untreated, alone in a cell, at his demand, roughly 24 hours a day, every day after gunning 10 people down. Then he begins to get treated by doctors. And the doctors learn that he came to the United States at a very early age. And I share this with you because yesterday we talked about cultural barriers to mental health. And that's real. And we'll talk about it during the trial. That's real. But you're going to learn as part of that analysis that he came to the U.S. at a very early age. He grew up in this area. He graduated from Arvada West. And his family has been very successful in their restaurant business. And he's worked in the restaurant business through high school and after he graduated from high school. So let's be clear. Every doctor believes the defendant has a mental illness. You're going to hear during the course of the trial, the defendant's been examined by a bunch of different doctors. They determined the defendant has a mental illness, but it comes nowhere close to legally insane. When they diagnosed the defendant, they determined the defendant has schizophrenia, along with millions of other people in the world. Millions of other people who have schizophrenia. And you'll learn from the doctor, there are basically what are called positive signs of schizophrenia and negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Positive are more on display. In other words, you can see them, hallucinating, delusions, and so on. The defendant had auditory hallucinations, voices that I'll talk about in a moment, but otherwise he largely displayed negative symptoms of schizophrenia, which are being withdrawn, unwilling or unable to communicate, unwilling or unable to engage in conversation. And they diagnosed him with schizophrenia. Certainly, the fact that the defendant refused medication, refused treatment, refused to talk about what he had done at King Soopers and why, made the doctor's job more difficult during his treatment, but also during his sanity evaluation. He didn't make that process very easy on the doctors, because when they asked him a bunch of questions, he would say, I'd rather not talk about that. Why'd you do this? I'd rather not talk about that. Why'd you do this? I'd rather not say. But the doctors conducted a very thorough sanity evaluation of the defendant. So when the defendant entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, you'll learn that Judge Bakke ordered the state hospital to conduct an evaluation by neutral experts. And there were two doctors appointed to conduct the evaluations, Dr. Torres and Dr. Gray. The prosecution will call both of them to testify. And you'll learn that Dr. Torres and Gray reviewed all of his medical treatment records, spoke to all of his attending physicians, spoke to the medical team, spoke to the prosecution, spoke to the defense, reviewed all of the reports, video, everything in the case. And they interviewed the defendant on video a number of times. The defendant didn't make it easy because initially he didn't want to be interviewed. He skipped one session and then he didn't want to be interviewed on video. But ultimately they were able to go through everything and they were able to determine, Dr. Torres and Dr. Gray, that the defendant was sane on March 22nd, 2021. The defendant was sane on March 22nd. You will learn that the prosecution then retained an outside expert to review those doctors' work, the interviews that the doctors had conducted of the defendant, and all the reports and all the video and all the photos in the case, everything in the case. And this doctor, like Dr. Torres and Gray, worked on it for months. And he also concluded the defendant was sane on March 22nd, 2021. Not guilty by reason of insanity. Referenced in jury selection yesterday about some experts testifying the defendant sane, some experts testifying the defendant's insane. It's what we call a battle of the experts. Except it's not going to happen in this case. Every doctor who examined the defendant for purposes of sanity, who's going to testify in this trial, determined the defendant was sane. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. One of the things they considered very carefully in making that determination was the voices. And the defendant, you'll learn, the defendant referenced the voices very often. Often. He either called it a voice at times or voices plural. And he talked about having a voice inside his head or voices inside his head. And of course, the doctors, because it's their job, are really focused on the voices. And they want to understand what role did the voices play? Did the voices, were they commands? Did they command him to do this? Did they tell him it was justified in any way? So you're going to hear they focused on this a lot. And the defendant would often just say the voices, and the doctors would say, well, why'd you drive there? The voices. Anything else? No. What'd the voices say to you? Just the voices. Bless you. Why'd you commit a mass shooting? The voices. What about the voices? Just the voices. And they looked at this really closely, as they should, and as you will, because I know from jury selection that you are a thoughtful group of people who want to reach the right outcome in this case for the right reasons. That was very clear from jury selection, and we appreciate that very much. And if you follow the evidence and apply the law, you will reach the right outcome in this case. Because you'll learn from the doctors that they did everything they could to try to get more information from him. As they put it, bordering on asking blatantly leading questions. Like saying, did the voices make you do it? Did you feel justified by the voices? Because they're trying to get him to say if that's true. And I'm going to show you a couple of the question and answer exchanges. They can't be used, these conversations, in finding him guilty of murder, but you can evaluate the sanity claim by looking at these conversations. And the judge will give you more instructions on that. But every doctor who conducted a sanity evaluation determined he was sane. Every doctor. Dr. Torres, at the restaurant, how did the voices impact you? Defendant, I would just keep working. He worked the day before the mass shooting. Dr. Torres, about the voices, did you feel justified in any way? No. Dr. Torres, did you think it was a good behavior to engage in? No. And he certainly knew the difference between wrong and right. And this next slide I'm going to show you is one you're going to remember when you're asked to answer this question at the end of the trial. Dr. Gray, when you decided to surrender, what did you think would happen then? They would take me to jail. Because he knew what he had done was wrong. Dr. Torres, did you want to die at that moment? Yes. Dr. Torres, why'd you want to die at that moment? What was going on that you had that desire? I did not want to go to jail. This is a rational calculation. He's just committed the mass shooting. He knows it's wrong, so his choices are die or go to jail. And he chooses to go to jail by stripping down to his underwear and surrendering to law enforcement. You'll be able to evaluate all of this during the course of this trial. But one thing the doctors looked at really carefully, and they're experts, but you don't have to be an expert. As we talked about in jury selection, you were able to identify some of the things you'd want to know. And you said yesterday, what about his planning? Can we consider his planning? Yes, you can. And did we learn anything about his planning? Oh, yes, we did. His planning and preparation included the following, ladies and gentlemen. He looked up on his phone, are 30-round magazines legal in the state of Colorado? The answer is no. Then he purchased 30-round magazines to kill 10 people at King Soopers. He bought an optic sight for his gun. In case you were wondering when I said shot in the head, shot in the head, shot in the head, how does someone have aim that good? They buy an optic sight that's battery powered, that inside the sight, you see a red light, and whatever you're pointing that red light at, whatever it lands on, it's not on the person's body, it's in the sight. But whatever you red light is on, that target is going to be hit. And he bought that sight. He also researched what is the most deadly type of round or bullet. When Suzanne Fountain was shot in the back and it blew out the front of her left breast and went all the way down the aisle on March 22nd, when Eric Talley's head had a bullet go through it from left to right, taking his life, that happened on March 22nd. That started on January 20th. When this guy is looking on his phone to see what's the most deadly type of bullet, what's the most deadly type of round, and then he starts researching it. And when you hear about the autopsies from the doctor that we call, and the doctor will say, I found green tips in this body, and I found green tips in this body. And you learn that green tips are the kinds of bullets that are used to pierce steel. They're also the kind of bullets that he found when he looked on January 20th. If he had planned these murders that morning, March 22nd, he's guilty. But 62 days earlier, he's planning to kill people with the most deadly type of bullet there is. And he's shopping and he's looking. In fact, from his phone, a computer forensic expert finds that he's researching prior mass shootings. And he looks at the El Paso, Walmart, Texas mass shooting, where a guy went in and killed 23 people in Walmart. And by the way, there are a lot of similarities between that shooting and this one. And he looks at that one, and in that description that he finds online, it says the Walmart shooter was inspired by the Christchurch, New Zealand shooter who killed 51 people. So then he looks at the Christchurch shooter, and he looks at that one. And in terms of knowing the difference between wrong and right, he learns that both of those shooters surrendered to law enforcement. They were arrested, prosecuted, and convicted. He knows just from the inspiration that he's seeking that it's also absolutely wrong. And he's researching prior shootings. Then he looks at an overwhelming number of guns, ammo, and equipment on his phone. And this is from January 1st to March 22nd. It's not that much time. It's weeks and months, and it shows that he planned it, but it's not that much time. So January 1st, I imagine some of the victims woke up saying, I'm going to go to the gym more. I'm going to read more. I'm going to spend more time with my loved ones. He woke up January 1st and started planning a mass shooting. When I say he looked at an overwhelming number, 6,000 images of guns, ammo, and equipment that he's looking for, because he's looking to commit a mass shooting. That also includes bomb-making materials, ladies and gentlemen. He starts looking at images of bomb-making materials. The number of those images, 400. He takes it one step further. He starts shopping for these things. He's looking at all these different websites, shopping for them. Then he starts buying them, guns, ammo, equipment, and bomb-making materials. Some of it found on his person, some of it found in his car outside King Soopers, and some of it found in his house. Some of the guns and ammo found in his house belonged to his family members, but a bunch belonged to him. And you're going to see that he ordered it to carry out a mass shooting. And from his phone, we know that he targeted Boulder. He targeted Boulder. He lives and works in Arvada. But in the weeks leading up to, the days leading up to, the hours leading up to this mass shooting, Boulder's showing up in his phone more and more and more. And what he's looking at on his phone is causing a list of places in Boulder to be recorded by his phone. And he's going to pull into the first big place in South Boulder that he comes across on March 22nd. And he's going to kill 10 people and try to kill 25 others. On March 16th, January 19th, he buys an assault rifle. January 19th, he buys an assault rifle.
New
Mr. Dunn.
approach.
Yes, sir.
March 16th, he picks up an assault rifle. Second, and that's the one he's going to use at King Soopers. March 17th, he's on his phone, and he's putting notes on his phone about how to conduct a mass shooting, how to move while shooting, like he did when he killed Kevin Mahoney. He also, on his notes on his phone, he puts things about how to clear a hallway. Do you know how to clear a hallway? It means when you're in a gunfight, how you do that without being shot. You're going to see it on the King Soopers video. So he wrote it on March 17th, practiced it, and then he acted it out in deadly and horrific fashion on March 22nd. I'm going to end with this, ladies and gentlemen. Be true to your oath. Those are the words Judge Baca said. That means don't look up the case on social media. Don't check the news. If you do those things, it derails the trial. Trial for which people have been waiting a long time. So if you go home tonight, and your family member says, started planning it in January, that conversation can't happen. You go in the back later, even on a break with your fellow jurors. And you say to her, did the DA just say that there's no expert testifying this guy's insane? That conversation can't happen.
Got to wrap it up, Mr. Doherty.
Save that for the deliberations. Follow the law. Follow the evidence. And we will reach that. He is.
All right, we're going to take our morning break. Thank you for your attention. Mr. Collins will take you out. I know that the admonition I would go over, Mr. Dougherty just raised it once again.